When an HOA tried to steal my grandfather's 55-acre ranch using fake legal claims, they picked the wrong family to mess with. I'm a lawyer and I discovered they'd been illegally occupying his land for years. By the time I finished, I owned their neighborhood and tripled their dues. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. My grandfather built his ranch with his own hands in 1967. 55 acres of beautiful land with rolling hills, a small creek running through the middle, and the most peaceful sunsets you've ever seen. He raised cattle, grew vegetables, and lived the simple life he always wanted. When I was little, I spent every summer at Grandpa's ranch. He taught me how to ride horses, fix fences, and work with my hands. Those were the best days of my childhood. Grandpa always said the ranch would be mine someday and I couldn't wait. But in 2019, everything changed. A big development company bought all the land around Grandpa's ranch and built a fancy neighborhood called Sunset Hills Estates. Suddenly, my grandfather's peaceful ranch was surrounded by million-dollar houses with perfect lawns and 3-car garages. The new neighbors didn't like having a working ranch next to their expensive homes. They complained about the smell of cattle, the sound of roosters in the morning, and the sight of farm equipment. They said it was bringing down their property values. That's when the Sunset Hills HOA decided to make Grandpa's life hell. The HOA president was a woman named Linda Walsh. She was in her 50s, drove a white Mercedes, and wore designer clothes even to grocery shop. Linda had moved from the city and thought she could turn our rural area into her perfect suburban paradise. The first problem started when Linda claimed that Grandpa's ranch was actually part of the HOA territory. She said the development company had included his land in their original filing, which meant he had to follow all their rules and pay their monthly fees. Grandpa laughed when he got the letter. "I've owned this land for 50 years, he told me over the phone. No fancy HOA is going to tell me what I can do on my own property." But Linda wasn't joking. She started sending violation notices every week. The cattle were inappropriate livestock for a residential area. The old barn was an eyesore that violated architectural standards. Even Grandpa's vegetable garden was improperly maintained agricultural use in a residential zone. Each violation came with a fine. $50 for the cattle, $100 for the barn, $25 for the garden. Within 2 months, the fines added up to over $2,000. Grandpa ignored them. He figured Linda would eventually give up and leave him alone. He was wrong. Linda hired a lawyer and sent Grandpa an official letter demanding payment of all fines plus interest. She claimed that his failure to pay HOA dues and fines gave them the right to foreclose on his property. When Grandpa called me, I could hear the worry in his voice for the first time ever. "Jake, I don't understand all this legal stuff," he said. "This woman is saying she can take my ranch. Is that possible?" I was a junior lawyer at a small firm in the city, just 2 years out of law school. I mostly handled simple contracts and minor disputes. But when someone threatens my grandfather, I become a completely different person. "Grandpa, don't worry about anything. I'm coming home to handle this." I took a leave of absence from my job and drove to the ranch that weekend. When I saw the stack of HOA letters on Grandpa's kitchen table, I got angry. Really angry. Linda Walsh was trying to steal my grandfather's ranch using legal tricks and intimidation. She thought she could scare an old farmer into giving up the land his family had worked for decades. She picked the wrong family to mess with. I spent 3 days reading every document Linda had sent. I also researched the original land deeds, HOA formation documents, and county property records. What I discovered made my blood boil. The development company had never actually included Grandpa's ranch in their HOA territory. They couldn't because Grandpa owned his land decades before the HOA even existed. Linda had simply drawn her own map that included his property, hoping no one would check the legal details. Everything she was doing was completely illegal. But that wasn't the worst part. While researching the HOA documents, I found something that made me smile for the first time in weeks. The development company had made a huge mistake when they filed their original HOA paperwork. They had included a 10-acre empty lot on the edge of the neighborhood that they didn't actually own. That lot belonged to my grandfather too. He had bought it in 1983 as an investment but never did anything with it. Linda's HOA had been illegally claiming ownership of Grandpa's land for 3 years. They had even been charging themselves HOA dues for maintaining that lot, not knowing they were trespassing on private property. I had everything I needed to destroy Linda Walsh and her precious HOA. My first move was to send Linda a cease and desist letter explaining that her HOA had no authority over Grandpa's ranch. I included copies of all the property deeds and legal documents proving that her claims were false. I also demanded that she immediately stop all harassment of my grandfather and pay damages for the stress and legal costs she had caused. Linda's response came 2 days later. Instead of backing down, she doubled down on her threats. She claimed my legal research was wrong and that she would proceed with foreclosure proceedings. She had just made the biggest mistake of her life. I filed a lawsuit against Linda Walsh personally and the Sunset Hills HOA for harassment, trespassing, fraud, and attempted theft of property. I asked for monetary damages, legal fees, and an injunction preventing any further contact with my grandfather. But that was just the beginning of my revenge plan. The real fun started when I filed a separate lawsuit claiming ownership of the 10-acre lot that the HOA had been illegally occupying. I demanded 3 years of back rent for their unauthorized use of Grandpa's property, plus damages for any improvements they had made without permission. The HOA had built a fancy entrance gate on that lot, along with landscaping, a fountain, and a sign welcoming people to Sunset Hills Estates. They had spent over $40,000 beautifying land that didn't belong to them. Under property law, when someone makes improvements to land they don't own, the real owner gets to keep those improvements for free. Linda's HOA had just given my grandfather a $40,000 gift. But I wasn't done yet. I also discovered that Linda had been using her position as HOA president to benefit herself financially. She had hired her husband's landscaping company to maintain the common areas at inflated prices. She had awarded the snow removal contract to her brother-in-law's business without getting competitive bids. She had even used HOA funds to pay for legal advice for her personal business ventures. I filed complaints with the state attorney general's office and the IRS. Linda was about to face criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud. The legal pressure worked faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks, Linda's lawyer called me wanting to settle out of court. "My client is willing to drop all claims against your grandfather's ranch," he said. "In exchange, you drop your lawsuits against the HOA." "No deal," I replied. "Your client tried to steal my grandfather's land. She harassed an 80-year-old man and caused him months of stress and worry. There are going to be consequences. What do you want?" I had been waiting for this question. First, Linda Walsh resigns as HOA president immediately. Second, the HOA pays my grandfather $50,000 in damages for harassment and legal fees. Third, the HOA formally acknowledges that they have no authority over his ranch and agrees never to contact him again. That's ridiculous. We'll never agree to that. Fine. Then we'll see you in court. And I'll make sure every newspaper in the county knows how your HOA tried to steal an elderly veteran's ranch using fraudulent legal claims. The phone went quiet for a long moment. "I'll talk to my client." 3 days later, Linda's lawyer called back with a counteroffer. The HOA would pay $25,000 and Linda would resign, but they wanted a confidentiality agreement preventing us from talking about the case. "No confidentiality agreement," I said. "People have a right to know what kind of person Linda Walsh is. But I'll accept the $25,000. We had a deal. But my revenge wasn't complete yet. I still had that 10-acre lot that legally belonged to my grandfather. The lot was right at the entrance to Sunset Hills Estates. Every resident had to drive past it to get to their homes. It was the prime piece of real estate in the entire neighborhood. I had a brilliant idea. Since Grandpa legally owned the lot, he could do whatever he wanted with it. And what he wanted was to join the Sunset Hills HOA as the owner of that 10-acre parcel. I filed the paperwork to make Grandpa a member of the HOA based on his ownership of the entrance lot. Under HOA rules, every property owner gets voting rights based on the value of their land. Grandpa's 10-acre lot was worth more than any 3 houses in the neighborhood combined. That gave him enormous voting power in HOA decisions. The remaining HOA board members tried to fight it, but the law was clear. Property owners have the right to join HOAs that govern their land. At the next HOA meeting, I showed up as Grandpa's representative with all the legal documents proving his membership and voting rights. The meeting was in Linda's replacement's living room. About 15 homeowners were there, all looking confused about why a stranger was attending their HOA meeting. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, "I'm here representing my grandfather, who is now the largest landowner in your HOA territory. He owns the 10-acre lot at your neighborhood entrance." The room erupted in shocked conversations. Nobody had realized that their fancy entrance was built on someone else's property. "As the majority landowner," I continued, "my grandfather is calling for an immediate vote on new HOA leadership and revised community rules. Under HOA voting rules, Grandpa's property gave him 51% of the total voting power. He could outvote every other homeowner combined. The first thing we voted on was dramatically increasing HOA dues. The monthly fee went from $50 to $300 per household. We needed the extra money to pay for enhanced community management services. Those services included hiring my grandfather as the official HOA consultant at $2,000 per month. His job was to provide advice on rural lifestyle integration for the community. We also voted to change the architectural standards. The new rules required every house to have at least one rustic agricultural feature, like a vegetable garden, chicken coop, or small livestock area. Residents who wanted to maintain their pristine suburban lawns could pay an additional monthly fee of $100 for a landscape variance permit. The homeowners sat in stunned silence as we completely restructured their precious HOA according to my grandfather's preferences. But the best part was still coming. We voted to install a large electronic sign at the neighborhood entrance advertising fresh eggs, organic vegetables, and ranch tours available daily. The sign would direct visitors to my grandfather's ranch for authentic farm experiences. We also approved plans for a weekly farmers market in the HOA common area, featuring local vendors selling livestock, farm equipment, and organic produce. The homeowners who had complained about living next to a working ranch were about to experience farm life whether they liked it or not. One woman raised her hand. "This is insane. You can't just take over our HOA and change everything." "Actually, I can," I replied. HOAs are democratic organizations. The majority landowner gets majority control. That's how your own rules work. But this will destroy our property values. Maybe you should have thought about that before trying to steal my grandfather's ranch. The meeting ended with half the homeowners storming out in anger. But the votes were official and legally binding. Over the next 6 months, the changes we implemented had exactly the effect I intended. Several families put their houses up for sale because they couldn't afford the new HOA dues. Others moved away because they didn't want to live in a community that embraced agricultural activities. Property values in Sunset Hills estates dropped by about 30%, while demand for rural properties in the area increased significantly. My grandfather's ranch, which Linda had claimed was hurting property values, became the most desirable property in the county. We got offers from buyers who wanted to experience authentic ranch living. But Grandpa wasn't selling. He was having too much fun with his new role as HOA consultant. Every month, he attended the HOA meetings wearing his old cowboy hat and boots. He would give presentations on topics like the benefits of roosters for natural pest control, and why every yard needs a compost pile. The remaining homeowners had no choice but to listen politely. Grandpa controlled the HOA budget, and they needed his approval for any community expenses. Linda Walsh had moved away 6 months after resigning as HOA president. I heard she was working as a real estate agent in another state, probably looking for a new community to terrorize. The poetic justice was perfect. Linda had tried to use an HOA to steal my grandfather's ranch, so I used the same HOA to make his ranch the center of the community. A year later, something wonderful happened. The families who stayed in Sunset Hills estates started to appreciate the rural lifestyle my grandfather represented. Kids learned to collect eggs from the chicken coops their parents were required to maintain. Adults discovered the satisfaction of growing their own vegetables. The weekly farmers market became a popular community event. Neighbors who had never spoken to each other started working together on gardening projects and sharing farming advice. Sunset Hills Estates evolved from a sterile suburban development into a genuine community where people knew each other and helped each other. My grandfather became the unofficial mayor. New residents would visit the ranch to introduce themselves and ask for advice on starting their own small farms. The HOA dues we had raised were used to build community gardens, install walking trails, and create educational programs about sustainable agriculture. What started as revenge against Linda Walsh became a transformation that benefited everyone. 3 years after the HOA tried to evict my grandfather from his ranch, I moved back home permanently. I opened a small law practice specializing in property rights and agricultural law. My first office was in a converted barn on Grandpa's ranch. Grandpa is 85 now, but he still wakes up every morning excited to check on his cattle and tend his garden. He loves telling visitors the story of how he became the most powerful person in the fanciest HOA in the county. "That Linda woman thought she could push around an old farmer," he always says with a grin. "She learned that you don't mess with people who work with their hands and know how to fight for what's theirs." The 10-acre lot that caused all the trouble is now a beautiful entrance garden where Grandpa grows flowers and vegetables for the whole community. The fancy HOA sign has been replaced with a simple wooden sign that reads, "Welcome to Sunset Hills Ranch Community, where neighbors help neighbors. Linda Walsh tried to evict my grandfather from his ranch, but instead she gave him control of her entire neighborhood. Sometimes the best revenge is just letting bullies defeat themselves with their own greed and arrogance. And sometimes, what starts as a fight over property ends up creating the kind of community people dream about living in.